The Garden of Wind, Chapter 1. Stones in the Sand. The road to the old monastery was barely a path, overgrown with tall grasses and half swallowed by time. No signs marked its beginning, and few remembered where it led. But Toma did. At least he believed he did. With a satchel slung over one shoulder and sand in his shoes, he followed the rhythm of the hills, letting the wind push and pull at his robe, like a tide against the shore. He had not come for answers. He had come to escape the noise, the thoughts, the restlessness. Cities had offered ambition, conversation, praise, conflict, but not peace, not once. And so, in a moment of quiet resolve, he had left them behind, trading the roar of streets for the hush of mountain air. At the top of the ridge, the world opened like a held breath. Below, nestled in a fold of rock and pine, lay the remnants of the Wind Garden, a forgotten training ground, once tended by a monk whose name had long since vanished into legend. All that remained were moss-covered stones, rows of silent trees, and a field of white sand combed into circles by no visible hand. The wind moved through it all like a teacher pacing without words. Toma descended slowly. There were no gates, no welcome, just the garden. He stepped between two worn posts that may once have held a sign. Every footstep he took softened. The silence was complete, and it made him strangely alert, as though someone were watching, not with suspicion, but with knowing. He dropped his satchel beside the sand and stood still. The air was cool but carried the dry scent of pine and earth. The sand garden extended before him, empty, simple, untouched. In the center lay several smooth stones. No pattern, no obvious meaning, just placement. He didn't know what to do, so he sat. The stone bench was rough beneath him, but he welcomed the discomfort. It anchored him. He closed his eyes. Nothing came. No insight, no voice, no vision. Just the wind brushing his ears. His knees ached. His shoulders tensed. His mind returned to thoughts. What he had left undone. What he had failed to become. What others might think. The silence revealed the noise within him, and it was louder than any street. Hours passed. The sun crossed the sky without concern. At one point he stood and walked the edge of the sand, observing the way the wind had shaped it. Tiny ridges like ripples in a still pond. He wondered who had made it, who had combed it last. Perhaps no one. Perhaps it was never finished. In the far corner of the garden stood a weathered rake. Without knowing why, he picked it up. The wood was smooth, worn by countless hands. He held it for a long time, feeling its balance. Then slowly, he placed the first line into the sand. It was imperfect. The rake caught a stone hidden beneath the surface. He tried again. Another snag. He knelt and ran his hand through the sand. Beneath it lay small rocks, scattered, sharp, buried. He paused. Then he began removing them, one at a time, setting each aside. When the area was clear, he drew another line. It came smooth, unbroken. For the rest of the day, he worked in silence. Rake, pause, remove, repeat. He forgot the cities. He forgot his past. He forgot even himself. There was only the sand, the wind, and the next stroke of the rake. By nightfall, the stars blinked to life above the mountains, and the wind garden whispered its approval in a breath Toma could not hear but somehow understood. He sat once more on the bench, the rake beside him, the sand now patterned with calm intention. Not perfect, not finished, but quieter. And so was he. Chapter 2. The Still Tree. Toma woke to the sound of branches brushing lightly against one another, like the hush of old silk. The morning air was thin and sharp, and dew clung to the edges of every leaf. He had slept beside the sand garden, wrapped in his robe, the rake resting like a staff beside him. No dreams had visited, only a long stretch of blackness and then the light. He stood slowly, joints creaking, body stiff. But something had changed. He noticed it not in his thoughts, but in what was absent. The tight coil in his chest, the familiar pressure of unfinished ambition, was no longer there. He walked toward a tree that stood at the far edge of the garden, alone among the stones. Unlike the others, it was gnarled and low, its branches reaching in all directions like a frozen wind. It had no leaves, only bark, twisted, dark, and cracked with time. He felt drawn to it. Beneath it sat a small, flat stone, shaped like a shallow bowl. Inside the bowl was water, clear and unmoving. Not a single leaf marred its surface. Toma sat down across from the tree. The wind tugged at his robe, then settled. The silence deepened, thickened. His mind reached for meaning. Why the tree? Why the water? But no voice answered, just the sound of breath and the pulse of stillness. For hours he remained there. At first thoughts came like insects, unwanted, quick, insistent. He let them pass. He did not fight them, but neither did he follow. He simply watched them arrive, stir, and vanish. And then there was only space. A bird landed on one of the twisted branches, chirped once, then flew off. The bowl of water did not ripple. It had accepted the moment and then the change. Toma stared at the surface. He saw the reflection of the bare tree. Then gradually his own. The longer he looked, the more he realized how much of his life had been spent in reaction, in pushing, grasping, becoming. But the tree did not become. It remained, not as stone, not as resistance, but as presence. It did not compete with the wind. It moved with it, without surrendering its root. He leaned forward and dipped his fingers into the water. Cold, pure. No words came, only the feeling that something had settled inside him, like dust after a long storm. Behind him, a soft voice spoke. "You've met the teacher." Toma turned. An old monk stood at the edge of the garden, robes faded to the color of clouded sky. His face was lined but not weary. "I thought I was alone," Toma said. "You were," said the monk, "until you weren't." Toma looked back at the tree. "What is it I'm supposed to learn?" The monk walked past him and sat beside the bowl. He did not look at Toma. "Some come here to find peace, others purpose. Some come to disappear, but the garden offers only this." "What is?" Toma frowned. "And if what is hurts." The monk finally turned to him, eyes like still water. "Then you sit with it until it teaches you something deeper than pain." They sat in silence. The tree creaked slightly. The bowl remained still. When the sun reached the western ridge, the monk stood. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "But remember, the tree is not waiting. Neither is the wind." He left without another word, disappearing into the pines as if returning to the silence itself. Toma remained where he was, gazing at the tree, his own breath slow and steady. He felt no sudden clarity, no flash of enlightenment, only a quiet agreement forming within him, a vow not to run from stillness again. The wind picked up slightly. A single pine needle fell into the bowl of water. The surface rippled, then settled. Chapter 3. The Stone That Did Not Move. Days passed, though Toma no longer counted them. The sun rose and fell like a breath, and the wind carried both silence and movement in equal parts. He raked the sand each morning, not to perfect it, but to be with it. The lines he made were uneven, interrupted by roots or scattered leaves, and he no longer minded. There was no goal. There was only the doing. The monk returned occasionally, sometimes speaking, often not. When he did speak, his words were few and precise, like stones placed in a stream, not to stop the water, but to shape its flow. One morning, as mist hovered low across the garden, the monk handed Toma a flat stone, small, dark, and smooth. "Place this somewhere," he said simply, "and do not move it." Toma took the stone without question. He wandered the garden, holding it in his palm, feeling its cool weight. He considered many places, beside the rake, under the twisted tree near the bowl. But each felt too chosen, too deliberate. In the end, he walked to the far edge of the sand, where the wind gathered and scattered dry pine needles in small spirals. There he placed the stone and stepped away. Days turned again. Wind came and went. The rake moved, leaves fell, birds perched and departed. But the stone remained. Toma no longer thought about why it had been placed. He simply worked around it, combing the sand, sitting beneath the tree, observing the sky. Sometimes he glanced at the stone. It never shifted. One afternoon, clouds rolled heavy over the valley. The wind howled louder than before, scattering the sand, knocking branches loose. Rain followed, soft but steady. Toma did not seek shelter. He stood in the middle of the garden, arms at his sides, eyes open. The storm passed like a thought, loud, brief, and gone. When the sun returned, he walked the garden. The sand was ruined. The lines vanished. But the stone was still there, unchanged. The monk approached him in the quiet that followed. "How do you feel?" he asked. Toma looked out across the broken patterns. "I feel still." The monk smiled faintly. "The mind is like the garden. It will be raked. It will be disturbed. But there must be a part of you, a stone, that does not move." Toma nodded slowly. The metaphor had no need to explain itself. He felt it, not as concept, but as fact. That night he sat by the stone and watched the stars reflect faintly in the damp sand. His thoughts came, but he no longer fought them. He let them pass. Some returned, some didn't. But none had power over him anymore. He understood now. A steady mind was not an empty mind. It was a rooted one. A mind that, like the stone, did not run from storms, but stayed where it had been placed, not out of defiance, but out of knowing. The next morning, Toma stood at the edge of the path that led back down the mountain. The monk met him there, holding nothing, offering nothing. "You may leave," the old man said, "but take nothing with you, except what you did not bring." Toma bowed low, then began the descent. The wind followed him for a time, whispering through the pines. And in the space behind his heart, where noise had once lived, there was now a stillness shaped like a stone.